Hey guys, welcome to the Lead with Vision podcast by Vision Arizona. My name is Nolan, one of the planters, and today we are joined by a special guest, Pastor Jason Taylor. Thanks for joining us, man.
Great to be here, man.
Awesome. So Jason and his wife, Melissa, if I'm getting this right, you guys moved to Yuma in 2005
Yeah.
to
End
plant
of
Vertical Church.
2004, really. Yeah.
You moved here in '04. It took a year.
Yeah, we started in '05. Yeah, it was less than a year. We'll get into that in a minute. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to interview you because, man, you're a guy who's seen a lot of, for lack of a better term, success, fruitfulness. You're an effective planter, well known in our network. Jason is on the lead team of our church planting network, Vision Arizona. And from his preaching, as I've listened, courage, conviction, consistency, and effective contextualization, speaking to the heart. And the church has flourished over the years. We'll talk about all this, but you've seen God do a lot of stuff. And so walk us through just kind of your story. How did you get into church planting, and what has God done since then?
Yeah. Thanks, man. It's an honor to be here. And back around the year 2000, probably, I was just praying about next steps, what God wants to do. I was a youth pastor, my wife and I, in a place in Illinois, right outside of St. Louis, and on the Illinois side. And we were there for 5 years by the time we left to come to Yuma. But while we were there, God just began to stir in my heart. There's something more that God wanted us to do with our lives, and it was something that was going to be risky and a little bit crazy, and I just knew that. And we began to pray and fast, and long story short, we spent a lot of time in prayer and fasting and extended fast and seeking the Lord on what to do. Felt like he wanted us to plant a church, and then it was like where to go. And of course, most people usually plant, if I'm right, around about an hour and a half from where they grew up, or place, or maybe where they are already at, where they have some roots, some rolling rocks, ahead of time to help them with the plant, with people. But we did not do that. We thought we were going to do that. We ended up driving about 30 minutes away to a place and thought that was going to be the place. And God was like, no, that's not the place. Through prayer and fasting, God put on our hearts 8 locations that I'd been studying about demographic growth and about the lack of evangelical churches compared to population growth and size. I grew up in Glasgow, Kentucky, from the South, and like churches literally on every corner. Say a county of 35,000 might have 230, 50 churches. Now, not all of them may be reaching people. It may not be as effective, or whatever we want to call it. But I knew God didn't want us to go to a place like that. He wanted us to go to a place that if everybody showed up on a Sunday to every church that's there would not be enough room. So there needs to be more churches. And it was growing. Well, Yuma was one of those places that God brought to our minds. Went home, told my wife, we went to Walmart, bought a map of the United States, put it on our bedroom wall, put 8 thumbtacks up there, and started praying through those. It was a period of about another year. And then God confirmed in our hearts with another couple, Danny and Amy Wells, that were working. Actually, they were lay people in our church that volunteered in our youth ministry in Illinois. And they decided God was calling them to go with us. And so we all 4 began to pray where. And before we ever visited Yuma, before we really knew a whole lot about it, we knew some, God just impressed upon us in a 1-week period while we were on a mission trip to Mexico, the south of Texas, not over here, but with our youth group. That week, at separate times, as we got back, we sat around our kitchen table and said, what did God tell you? What did God tell you? What do you believe? And all of us had confirmations of peace that Yuma was the place we were supposed to go. We'd never visited here, and it's not the end of the earth here, but you can see it from here. You know what I mean? So further than anything. So we parachuted in, and it's not recommended, but somebody has to do it. You've done it. You know what I'm talking about. And that was 2004 by the time we landed, end of 2004 in Yuma. We started the church in March of 2005, which was way too soon. And I learned a lot through that. We were not the big launch large thing that happened in a lot of places. We had to dig it out. Took us a few years to get to 100 people. And then in a 3-week period, it grew to about 250, leveled off at 230, and then we just began to, over a period of a few years, continue to double and double and double. And here we are now, 20 years later, 21 actually now, and God's done great work. And I look back, in the middle of it, I was like, God, I wish we could have had 400 people at our launch. Instead, we had 54, the next week 25, and in 3 months, I successfully grew it down to 18 people. So that's how we started.
Did you guys launch out of a school, living room? Like, what was the scenario?
Yeah, so we launched out of a school, and this was before a lot of networks were established. This was before a lot of the big name networks were established too, and even church planting books had not been written, a lot of them yet. I mean, you think about it, even the iPhone had not been released yet. So we launched in a school, elementary school, and a cafeteria, and some hallways. Did not have the portable church in a box, church on wheels boxes and stuff. We built all that. We took PVC pipe and my wife made black curtains. We didn't know you could buy pipe and drape back then, or we could not afford it too. And so it was just grinding it out, man. And now looking back though, it's like God did a great work in me personally. And now I can say, been through every growth level up to where we are now, and help other guys, because I don't want them to go through that. I do not want them to go through that. So that's kind of now where I'm at in this season of life.
If folks were going to show up this Sunday at Vertical Church, what would they see? What would be, just the experience?
Yeah, so we now own almost an entire block of our city. There's a little bitty car lot on the corner, and we ended up buying a hotel that was here, tore it down, a movie theater that was here, renovated it, added on a kids wing, bought a Chinese restaurant and tore it down. So you would see in our city a massive building, and you would walk in and you would be greeted, and people would guide you to where you need to go. And now we have 5 services on the weekend: Saturday 3 o'clock, 4:30 p.m., and Sunday 9, 10:30, and 12. And so we have a vibrant, growing youth ministry on Wednesday nights as well, 6th through 12th grade, with their own building, which used to be our old building. It's all connected now, all of that. And they would get a gospel message straight from the Bible, with a call to salvation and a call to action to take your next step in discipleship. And I think they would see a lot of life change and a lot of people that look like the city of Yuma. In other words, it'd be a wide swath of people who it's culturally diverse and also looks like Yuma. And that's kind of what we set out to do in the beginning. It took a while to get there, but we are there now. My lights just went out, man. I sat still.
One of the significant things to my mind about your church is the size and effectiveness of that church and the size of a place like Yuma. Yuma isn't small by any means, but it's not huge. And to have a church that's running 5 services and seeing baptisms, salvations this regularly is a real rare thing. And so you understand Yuma, even though you parachuted in. I think a lot of guys who are thinking about planting or currently leading churches, they're going to be thinking about this first topic I want to hit: contextualization. Contextualization is such a big deal. So my question for you is, if we can jump to that, in the early days, you moved to Yuma, and then you've been there 2 decades. What did you, think about Yuma that has changed now, right? So like, what has being in Yuma taught you as an Arizona, as a Yuma planter? There are a lot of folks who listen to this who are going to go to Arizona specifically, so I think that's really helpful. But what have you learned that has changed your perspective about the context you're in now?
Yeah. Well, number one, it's hotter than I ever thought, and you know that. But it's beautiful most of the year. And, coming in, I thought that I could take a specific model, so to speak, especially coming from the South and from that area. You go into a place and you think, and in that time period that we planted, like we're doing something brand new, well, out west is wide open. and things aren't so new. In other words, yeah, been there, done that. Like maybe in the deep South, some of the stuff we were doing back then would have been like, whoa. It would have people in the town would have been like, maybe we got to see what's happening over here. But for us, it wasn't like that different than some of the churches that were already established. I mean, yes, we were different, but not that different. And so, I didn't know. I think going into it, where we're at here, the heavily border influence, military influence. I knew it was 50% Hispanic, but then arriving and realizing, oh wow, it may be more than that. I thought maybe I'd need to know Spanish a little more, but don't have to really know Spanish. And also, I realized that it was where we're at. Yuma is different than Tucson. It's different than Phoenix. It's different from any of those places, and all of those are different from each other. But where we're at, like I realized that it was easy to walk into a place that was really down to earth, had a small town feel, but yet kind of I don't know if you'd call it a mid-sized city. I have no idea, like a little over 100,000. And so, you would see that still spread out, but yet, a everybody knows each other kind of thing. You would say, hey, do you know? And they would know. And it was like everybody is connected. It's really odd that way. But yet also the transition of the military every 3 to 4 years or every even 6 months, like right now it's PCS season, permanent change of station. People are moving in and out this time of year, and people go, and so you get to know people, and then all of a sudden in 2 years they're like, hey, I'm moving to Japan, or I'm moving to North Carolina, or I'm going over here. So not knowing, and I would say to people is learn your city and take time. If you notice my story, we landed at the end of October, and we launched end of March. That's not very long, especially if you're parachuting in. I had this big burden on my shoulder that in my mind thought, if I launch it, they will come. And what I figured out is that I first have to let this city know that our church, we care about them. And we want to know you before you could even ever come into, at that time, a school that we were at. And it's 10 times harder not having that permanent location too. So you're just there for a few hours on a Sunday, and people don't usually, drive by a school and expect a church to be there. So early on, big challenge was earning the trust of the city, and I think for church planners going forward, they need to make sure that they learn the personality of their city. Years ago, there was an old book called Church Unique by Will Mancini that I read early on, and that really helped me because I came from a mindset of, if I do church a certain way, then people are going to come because it's so cool, cutting edge, and different. And I realized that no, God's called me to do a church a certain way, uniquely, in the unique city that He's called me to. And so we started serving the school we were in. We started, handing out bottles of water, getting to know people. A lot of it came from being a church. From that book, we came up with the statement, the vertical church exists so that people far from God can become the hands and feet of Jesus. And so everything was driven by, first, we're going to be in the community being the hands and feet of Jesus, showing kindness in radical and practical ways to everybody. And we would do all of these things, and knocking on the door and handing out half gallons of milk, knocking on the door and handing out loaves of bread with a card that says, God loves you, from the vertical church, that kind of stuff. Just getting to know our city, doing bigger type kindness projects where it got the attention of the city, like a gas buy down or things like that early on, so that people would believe and know that we are here. We wanted to eventually be a church that if this church shut down, the city would miss them. And of course, when you first come in, there's not a lot of you as a church, and so you don't know the city. You got to learn all of its rhythms. You got to know that in Yuma, the fair is the biggest week of the year, and that everybody goes to the fair, so you're not going to plan things around that. You got to know the school system and how those rhythms are in the town. You got to know that it's summer. In the summertime, it's so hot. People are getting out of here. They're going to San Diego. They're going to places that are cooler. You got to know that, for us, Christmas Eve is not a huge outreach like Easter, because we live in a transient town where people, a lot of them are not from here. So what do? They either go back because they're in the military, or they're from their families in Mexico, so they go to Mexico. And so we don't have people here around Christmas time. So it's just different. So getting to know all that stuff, things in Phoenix didn't work here, things back east didn't work here. We had to love people before asking anything from them, and just keep doing that over and over and over again.
Was there anything you did? By the way, this is brilliant. Was there anything you did to learn those things about your city? Or was that just a matter of time? Like, how did that start to click?
Yeah, for me, I joined, or I started going to chamber of commerce meetings and stuff, and just kind of looking around, getting to know, like what's going on in this town. Like, who's the mayor? What's the needs of this city? Interviewing people like that, interviewing like a principal of the school we met in. What's the needs that you have? And then you got to know that there was a lot of schools in Yuma that were considered poverty level. In other words, over 100% of the kids are on the free or reduced lunch program. So years later, we started a thing called Power Pack Yuma, where we give kids food on the weekends to eat because they rely so much on the school during the week. And so just learning those type of things, learning that handing out free bottled water was a big deal because it's so dry and hot here. But the specific things that we did was just to be out in the community at events, and rubbing shoulders and seeing the types of people that were there and what they looked like, how they acted, what the culture was. Knowing that things didn't start on time, like you would go to the bank and it opens at 9, but nobody would be there yet. So at 9:05 it might open. Okay, that tells me something, about the mindset, of what's going on. So just picking up and being observant, and being observant of what's happening around you, and not just staying at your house, hanging out at coffee shops, being out in the community, and learning to bless other people, buying the coffee for the person behind you, and in line, and not expecting anything from it, that kind of stuff, and just knowing, getting to know the culture of the city by being in it. I don't have any specific things other than we got out in the community and did random acts of kindness.
Mm.
Just a lot of it. Yeah, I mean, even like I said, there was one summer every Wednesday we would go and knock on doors, not to present the gospel like we used to do in the old days, or to Romans Road to Salvation or whatever, but we would do it just to, like I said, hand them a loaf of bread or a half gallon of milk, and that kind of stuff. Just giving them something, a bag of fruit. And that was, it sounds weird now thinking about it, but that was what just got us solidified in the community as a church that loves the city and wants to help them out in any way possible.
I think that's gold, man. The fact that you personally modeled a lot of that and also perceived a lot of that, rubbing shoulders with people. And even those very pragmatic things you did could be replicated right now and be felt strongly by any church and in any city. Because, I mean, even all over social media right now, people are talking about how, like, even groceries feel like a pinch because of where the economy's at, where housing's at. And so these are usable principles that can be plugged in any context right now. But I especially appreciate that you discerned that through spending time in your context. You're obviously an evangelist, and I want to, if we can, switch to evangelism, and in particular, how you've multiplied your heart for evangelism into the culture of the church. You may have already answered a lot of this, but I think hearing your heart, there has to be a culture of evangelism at Vertical Church. Unfortunately, I've never spent time there, but even looking at it from the outside, you really do look like Yuma. There is a diverse congregation, people from all walks, all ages, young. You have a very young church, but also old, everything in between. And so I guess my question for you is, as you guys talk a lot about being the hands and feet of Jesus, connecting with the community, how do you keep evangelism just from being either an event that you guys put on, something you say during a message, or like a slogan in the halls, and instead actually build it into the culture, the fabric of the community? In other words, getting ordinary people in your church to understand that vision and then participate in it.
Hmm. Yeah, I think you said the key words, culture. you've got to build the culture, and the chief responsibility that you have as the planter pastor is to build the DNA and the culture of what God's calling you to lead there. And for me personally, my heart beats heavily to be a church. Like I said, we exist for people far from God. That was at the beginning of our church. Before we ever had our first service, we exist as a church. And the far from God, the saying came about later, but it was like far from God. Like Jesus went and ate with the sinners and the tax collectors. And the Pharisees said, why is he doing that? And he said, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I've not called to come call the righteous, but the unrighteous to repentance. And so from the very beginning, I decided that we were going to be a church, that we were going to take that literally, that every single week we would be a place that people could invite their unchurched lost friends to, and that we would always provide an opportunity for them to respond to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And we would celebrate it, and we would rally around that, and we would create, and over the years what we did was we create mantras or words that created the culture. And so you've heard the saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? The strategy is great, but you got to have the culture. And what builds the culture is the words that you say. And the chief wordsmith of the church, God works through the pastor as he's on stage. And so a lot of these things came up as I was preaching. And so then they would become like, for example, we're making it hard to get to hell from Yuma. That's a big saying we say around here all the time. Like, we're making it hard to get to hell from Yuma. And the crowd cheers at that. As I build it up in a sermon, and we preach on, and we say things like invest in and invite people to church or to the gospel. And so we use the words invest and invite. That's something from the very beginning. And every single year from the very beginning, the third week in January, everybody knows what I'm going to preach on. They may not know it, but this is what I preach on: invest and invite. Because the very next week is kind of the kickoff to our ministry season. And so I say, this is our big series that we're kicking off, where we will invest and invite. And we built it on prayer. We've linked it to a series. We adopt an outreach plan, and we do not forget about follow-up. And we work that all together. And every single week, we invite people to make a decision to follow Jesus. Now, I know a lot of churches have different views on all of that, and I'm fine with that. Some churches do it a few times a year and do a really great job at that. But what I've seen for the most part is that a lot of churches don't do it at all. They do not preach toward a decision, whether it's, I believe discipleship is this: what's my next step and who's my one more? Basically, what's my next step, Jesus? I'm already a Christian. What's my next step? Okay, a step closer to the cross. You look around, the crowd gets a lot smaller, right? That means I got to not just come and see, now I'm coming and dying. Like, something's dying inside of me. I got to deny myself. Okay, and then who's my one more? Always. And we say here, uno mas, who's my uno mas? And so I say these things from the stage, like uno mas. I even have a t-shirt somebody made me, uno mas, because I'm like, when I'm preaching that weekend, I may even have the uno mas shirt on because I want to make a joke about it, and say in Espanol, because they know I don't know Spanish, uno mas, and then everybody laughs about it. Again, that's contextualizing it to the culture, and joking about that. But the truth is that every single week, and most churches don't do this, they don't ask the crowd as they're preaching through the whole thing, building up to, you got to take a next step, and who's your one more. And so for some people who aren't lost or who aren't believers yet, their next step obviously is to become a believer. And why not offer that every single week? Now, when I say offer it, I'm not saying you have to have a come forward invitation, you have to do whatever, or you have to quote unquote pray a prayer, okay? However it is, I'm just saying you're offering Jesus and asking them clearly to acknowledge that they have professed Jesus. That's the second step that most people miss. They would say, well, I offer Jesus every week. Well, have you given them a clear step to acknowledge and profess Jesus as Lord? Because the Bible says, as you know, that we confess with our mouth Jesus is Lord, right? So they don't have to exactly say that. I understand all that. But are they confessing Jesus as Lord? Give them an opportunity, and then we follow up. we call all the people who make decisions for Jesus every week. And we also have a process for them to walk through with a new believers class. And then we next step, baptism, baptism, baptism. And so we are promoting baptism 4 weeks out from our baptism weekends, and asking people to take that next step and to continually just take next step. Who's your one more? Take the next step. Who's one more? And so it's something you got to be intentional about, and put it in the rhythm of your calendar. And even down to the point of like every single week, like right now we're in James. And so we're preaching through the book of James all summer. And we called it About That Life. We didn't call it James. And so just from simple fact of saying we're about evangelism, which means people far from God don't know junk about James. Like, who's James? I thought we worship Jesus, you know? So you put a card out and you're inviting people to James. Who's James? I want to go to church, you know? I want to invite, I thought it was about Jesus. Okay, I get, you know. So what do we call it? About That Life. And we go, because James, the whole thing is about being about the Christian life, like saying or doing what you say you believe, you know? And here's what even down to this, every week we'll say, whatever book we're in, hey, today we're going to study the biblical book of James. If you don't know where that's at, let me tell you about the Bible. The Bible's split up into two parts. You got the Old Testament front, New Testament in the back. In the book of James, I mean, if you have a paper Bible, you go all the way to the end, kind of turn left, or go to the table of contents or Bible app, you know. So we're breaking it down all the way. That's part of evangelism. And then at the same time, I'm still saying the meaning of that word in its original language, that's for the people who, you know, I'm trying to grow them deeper into a next step. So I'm doing both and what I'm preaching to every week is people who are far from God, people who've just made decisions, and people who are maturing in Christ. And hit all of those, but at the forefront, it's always the person far from God. Because if we can start there, the rest of the people will get something as well. And so it just has to become intentional culture that you continually build, continually celebrate. Every single week on social media, we will post 13 people gave their lives to Jesus, 5 people gave their lives to Jesus, 4 people. And those are, we measure it with a database. We don't do raising hands. We get their names, all of that kind of stuff. This, you know, it's not a repeat thing. So we make sure that, you know, it wasn't like they're doing it every week or whatever. And at the end of the day, like, salvation is of the Lord, you know, it's the Lord's. And so we're just presenting the gospel. They're professing. And if they made an empty profession, that's between them and God. But we're going to push them and ask them to take next step, because that's making disciples and baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And so that's just continually modeling it. Giving them, key thing is to give them permission. Give them permission to invite and invest in people's lives. Because I think a lot of people just don't know that they can. They know they should, but they don't know they can, and they don't know how. And making it so simple. Permission to tell your story. Permission to pray for your coworkers. Permission to love your neighbors. Give them permission. And you don't become an evangelistic church by accident. You build it by the conviction that you have, and that every single week people are dying and going to hell, and we're making it hard to get there from wherever.
Dude, I'm ready to get baptized right now all over again. No, that was an incredible. I hope guys and gals are leaning in on this, because these principles are almost a nuts and bolts for how to build an evangelistic. And honestly, you've also tied this with discipleship. Those are one and the same, really. They're all one process, but a nuts and bolts on how to like both reach and grow people into their next steps, from a cultural standpoint, down to your calendar, down to your intentional language, your follow-up system. Seems very clear to me that you guys are calling people after they've made some kind of public decision. And then the fact that you're also mobilizing people, giving them kind of like handlebars and clear language to grab onto. Brilliant, dude. Like, I think if folks apply these few things you said right there, it would be hard not to see baptisms and salvations on a monthly, weekly type basis. So I really appreciate that, man. This is huge. Okay, I want to jump now to if you're doing this kind of thing, you're going to grow, right? Like, you're going to reach people. There's so many, and especially in a state like Arizona and anywhere on the more left coast of the United States of America and probably the other side too, you're going to see people come to know Jesus. When that happens, you cause yourself problems on the other side of that, we all know. Because with more people comes more problems, whether that's interpersonal things, need for developing leaders, larger budget. Do people automatically start giving? What does it look like to get a new space? Oops, we outgrew this. Do we need another service? Is there anything in the Bible about how to like facilitate all of that? And you really have to lean into leadership at some point. So I want to talk about mindset shifts in growing churches. You've been a growing church for 2 decades. You talk about you guys started to double after you shrank it down to nothing. You just started to double after that. And I hear that story a lot with effective church planters. I guess your church has moved from from multi-service. You guys have multiplied teams. You have a lot of impact in the city. What were the biggest leadership shifts that you had to make as the church grew, right? So like as the leader, how have you had to think differently, especially in all those bigger things that guys are going to face as they go beyond just their own ability and personality from the stage. And now they've got 200, 1,000, 1,200, you know what I mean, 2,000. How do you shift your mindset in those seasons? I'm thinking things like staffing systems, delegation, protecting the culture. We all know that things get watered down. So like, talk me through just for you, what major shifts took place?
Yeah, so I never was a part of a church that was over 150 people, like ever in my life. So I grew up in that kind of context. And so I did not know how to lead. I never saw anybody lead beyond that other than at a distance, you know. So I did not have access, especially early on, to anybody that was leading. So I had to go out and find these people. So actually this coming Tuesday at our all staff meeting, my talk's going to be called this leadership lesson I learned a long time ago that I keep repeating to myself. And it's this: you ain't that smart, Jason. And so I have had to keep telling myself for years, you ain't that smart. And the point is this: it's not to, self-talk derogatory to yourself or anything like that, but to know that at 18 people, you ain't that smart to grow it to 36. You ain't that smart to grow past 150. You've got to find people who've done this. And so the mindset shift that took place for me was, number one, was being, in my opinion, we have to be humble enough and hungry enough to seek out help, coaching, a network, people who can help you. Early on, when we were 30 people, I contacted a guy who was in New York City, and he was doing coaching networks. His name was Nelson Searcy. You may have heard of him. And hadn't written any books yet, but he was doing these like CDs and stuff, like, double your, from 75 to 125 to 250. And I listened to all of them, and I'm like, man, I need somebody to walk me through this. And so he had somehow got connected to a group of like 3 or 4 pastors in Phoenix, and they had talked him into flying into Phoenix once a month for 6 months to do a coaching network. And I'm in Yuma, and it's almost a 3-hour drive up, 3-hour drive back. And so I asked if I could be in it, and it costs money, right? Well, immediately, especially at that stage of the game, and I've seen guys do this, as soon as the money question comes up, paying somebody for their help, you're like, and again, what's the leadership lesson? You ain't that smart, Jason. So go out and pay for it. So I paid out of my pocket, not the church's pocket, to go once a month for 6 months to be with him. And I think it was about 3 or 4 other pastors every month. And I learned principles then that I'm still applying now, just on a larger scale. That was the major mindset shift that happened early on, to work a system that's every 6 months, to basically, we call them kickoffs here at Vertical Church. It's like relaunching your church every 6 months, and you go through the whole thing. I came up with the words plan. You prepare with prayer, you link it to a sermon series, you adopt an outreach plan, and you never forget follow-up. So if you do those four things in the 4 to 5 months leading up to that sixth month, and then boom, you run it through it. We have like, I think we have 3 kickoffs a year, we call it. And so we do it more than every 6 months. And that is where we're pushing everybody toward that one goal of that day, and that series is going to be where we, and we don't say it from stage, double in size. But basically it's who's your one more, right? Who's your one more? Go reach them, invest and invite. And so that mindset shift had to happen early on. I think it happened for me, Nolan, out of necessity of it not working like I thought it was going to work. You know, launching in an era when launching large really started to take off in the South. And I knew those guys, and I read about those guys, and social media wasn't out, but there was blogs and there was things that were happening, and you hear the scuttlebutt around the United States of like, whoa, that guy started with 500 and now they're 1,000 within 12 months and we have 18 people, 30, what's going on? And so I think immediately I just had to humble myself and say, you ain't that smart, like you got it. So then as the church doubled, then it became, I just continually did that. I would call people. So when we were 100 people, I'd call people that were 200 people and say, hey, what has to happen when your church is 200? What's the mind, that same question that you just asked me? What changes in your mindset as a pastor? And so I would write it down. And then honestly, Nolan, I would just do those things. Unless it was something I thought was just outrageous or whatever, I would just do them. And then 400, there were some churches in this town. I called those pastors. Hey, what does it look like? Then 1,000, then 1,500, then 2,000. And then a couple summers ago, I called churches of 3,000. Some guys way past 3,000 guys, and through all of that, I've created relationships and stuff. Where now I got guys that I can just call at any time for things. But basically, going back to, I'm just not that smart. I've got to find people that have done this before, and this is where I think a lot of guys fail, or not fail, but don't make the next move. They just do not do what the other person did. Like, just do it. If it doesn't culturally fit, okay, it doesn't contextualize it to where you're at, but just do what they say, because they're probably right, And also realize this, that at the end of the day, God is doing a work inside of you that he's really, really interested in, probably more than what he's going to do through you. He wants you to grow, and the working of your faith, produces the patience, work, character, and all that. And I don't have the Bible memorized, but the verse. And at the end, you lack nothing, right? And so if you need wisdom, you ask God for it, and you can ask others, and God will work through others, and just be humble enough to make the big shifts along the way, and let other people do stuff, and let them fail, pick them back up, but create a culture too that you're going to hold them to a standard, and if they don't hit that standard, we're going to work toward that standard. If they can't hit that standard, then maybe that's not the place for you to serve or to lead or to be on staff. Let's move you over here, or let's do this. It's just not for you. Nothing against the person. It just doesn't happen. And protecting the vision and that culture, because as you start a church, there's going to be all kinds of people that will come, and they will want all kinds of things for you to do, because a lot of times church plants, as will draw people from other churches, because they're just grundled and they're like, here's a new thing, and then they'll come in and they'll try to hijack the vision. They don't know they're hijacking it. Some of them are just just foolish people. They're not like meaning to like harm in an evil way. Sometimes they're evil, but a lot of times they're just foolish, and they're just like, we did Awana over here, so you should do Awana here. Just Awana's great, whatever. You're like, well, we're not going to be in Awana church. So you've got to you've got to contextualize and just really, really have a mindset of what God wants you to do, and just be willing to ask for help, and ask other people what they're doing. And what the great thing now about coaching other church planters is I'm learning from them, churches that are smaller and that are starting out. I'm learning all kinds of stuff, and I've learned over the years from other church planters too. Now through that, got in touch, with Vision Arizona. What was that about? That was in a moment in our church's history where we were about 200 people. and I was seeking, again, help, and got in touch with Converge Southwest and then, Vision Arizona. And what did they do? They adopted us in. So we weren't a church plant from the ground up, but they adopted us in. And those guys, listen, I went in with a plan of I wanted to spend money to do one thing, and I walked into a table and they said, you don't need to do that thing, you need to do these things. And I'm telling you, in that moment, I was mad, I was upset, I didn't show it on my face, I thought they don't know what they're talking about. But then something hit me, and I know it now. You're not that smart, Jason, but I didn't know it then. But I had to eventually just say, okay, I'm going to do what they say, and they were right. As is most of the guys that I've reached out to for coaching and help along the years. They were right. Nobody's right about everything, but for the most part, they've been there, done that, and they don't want you to go through it. So,
Wow. Dude, that coaching thing, that humility and actually applying what dudes are sharing, that is huge. And I think that really is the key difference across the nation among leaders who see the kinds of results that everybody prays for and the ones who don't. Generally, I think it is really a coachable, not even a coachability. I think the better term is hunger, because they're actively and proactively pursuing. Like your story is one of, hey, I'm hitting this sticking point and I'm hungry and I want to know the answer to this. I may not always like it, but I'm going to listen and I'm going to lean in, and then I'm going to apply, and then look what God can do. As he stretched you and made you a better leader, he was able to do more through you. That's incredible, dude. I didn't prepare any of this, but it's so you can push back if you want, or we can cut it out. But selfishly, I'm curious if there was ever a sticking point that was the hardest for you, whether it's like a size barrier or a lid of some kind, artificial lid, a mindset, where you were like, I'm trying to push past this, but like I can't push past this, and something unlocked it. Was there ever a season in the church where you're like, that was the hardest thing to overcome?
If we want to talk personal, like pride, thinking I knew what was right, but the other people that I were talking to, they actually knew what was right. It was early on, we were growing, and I moved the church from 2 services to 3 services. And I thought, we're doing 3 services. This is great. But if you looked across all 3 services, there was a lot of space. And I'd done it too early. Now, at that point, we've been doing it for months and months and months. I don't even remember how long. And a couple of guys from Vision Arizona came down, and they attended. Of course, there was a big long list of some stuff to get coaching on, and I was fine with all that. But one of the things they said is, you need to go back to 2 services. And I was just like, no, I know that if we go back 2 services, that's a sign of failure. That's a sign of we're going backwards. We're not going forward. No, God will provide, because I have the faith and I know exactly what I'm doing. And there's just more options equals more people, all that kind. I had everything. Fought against it. I mean, I was, and I'm, no. And finally, I just did it. And we went to 2 services. And I mean, it was in weeks. We were like doubling, and then and then before long, we added the 3rd service that we actually needed. But it was just like, that was a breaking point. It was like we would have been stuck at 3 services till now, probably, in the smaller auditorium, because it did not have the traction, the critical mass, that we needed in each service to make it exciting. When we went back to 2, all of a sudden, okay, we got some seats, but not very many. Oh, wait, now we're really running out of seats. Oh, people are sitting in the aisles. Oh, now people see the need for 3. Now they're going to actually make decisions to actually split up in this right way, serve, because there's a need. I mean, there's just all kinds of things opened up, which now, we've been from 1 to 2 to 3 to 3 to 4 to 3 to 5 to 4, and then back to 5. Like, we've done all of those services and rotations. And I've learned, now through that early lesson early on, not to go too early. But that was a big sticking point. And again, it goes back to, to be a church planner, I think you got to have a certain level of confidence. Others might call it cockiness. I hope not. There's a difference. But there's a confidence. It's a Holy Spirit confidence that God's empowered you. And every good church planter has this, but they've got to temper that with the humility of God in them, that they don't know everything. And yeah, you may have read a book, or you may have been under someone, or you may have been a part of a movement that did this, but now things are different and the gates of hell are coming at you. And you got to employ other soldiers around you that have been there, generals, commanders, the people who've been there for 20, 30 years, that have been through what you're walking through, been in the trenches with you, and what they will, and went before you and established the beachhead before you ever got there. And so you go after those guys and then listen to what they say and swallow your pride and do what they say, and be so coachable that you're still confident. But when you get coached, like going from 3 to 2 services, I remember the mindset shift that I had to say, okay, I'm not going to sell this to the church as a failure, that we're going backwards. No, I'm going to be confident that this is what God wants us to do, to go to 2 services, because we're going to reach more people. And that's what we did, and we did. But it was not my thought. It was somebody else that gave me that thought. But that was a big sticking point early on, if that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, dude, that was gold. I'd never heard that story before. That's interesting. And the humility piece is obviously the biggest theme. Let's close with that. Like, you've spent a lot of time planting other churches now. That's interesting. Like, you've not only seen a church grow to some of the greatest potential that any of us could pray for, but you've also sent people away, sent leaders away. So church planting better than most people in the nation. I'm just curious, as we close, what is it that sets a church planter apart? Like, what are those makings of an effective church planter that if you could give guys who are just starting out anything to walk away with, like, I want to embrace this mindset, what would that be?
Yeah, so we've set out in Yuma. We've planted 2 other churches out of our church, and so when we've learned a lot through that as well. And I would really love to see in the next 10 years, 10 more come out of our church somehow. We've got a guy in Texas right now that been discipled in our church. He was military, got out, now he's over there. So working with Vision Texas to maybe, so it may not be in Yuma, but like planters coming out of us, and they could be in Yuma. We could probably still do 10 more churches in Yuma and reach people. But I think the 3 characteristics, and I didn't come up with this, but I think it was Patrick Lencioni, but humble, hungry, and smart. I really think the guy has to be humble, not a false humility, but a humility that all glory goes to God, and unless God builds a church, it's all in vain. And that you're not that smart. God knows what's going on, and humble enough to also bow your knee to Jesus and spiritually allow him to form you. And that character, like deeply work on character in the heart, in that person that's saying, I think God's calling me to start a church. Because immediately, what do they want to do? They want to go and start a church. But well, let's just slow down. That's what I say now. I'll say like, oh, that's great, man. There's this residency, and I see how they react. Like they're like, how long is it? I was like, like 12 months. And they're like, oh. And if they're like, oh yeah, that sounds good. And it's like, oh, okay, this guy might want to learn a little bit before he goes. And if they're like, oh, I ain't got 12 months, man. I mean, I had a guy sit in my office. He's like, I found out he's moving like in a week. Guy called us, start a church. We're moving in a week. We're moving back to some northern state. I forget now. And he didn't start a church, but that's what he was doing. He was going, him and his wife. And I'm like, does your wife want to go? She was sitting right there. I just obey my husband. And I'm like, oh no, this isn't good. And I'm like, and I said, maybe a residency. And I was thinking online residency, that we partnered with a church called the Evangelistic Fellowship in Nashville. I know Rock Point has a residency that's on site and stuff, but they do one over there as well that's online. And so I'm like, let's do this 12-month residency over here. And that was pushed back. And so humble, just humility or maybe I might give them a book and say, hey, 30 days, let's meet up again. I want you to read this book in 30 days and have 10 learnings on it. Just see where they're at. And hungry, that leads into the hungry. Are they going to read? Are they going to learn? Are they driven? Are they a self-starter? Start looking at their life, how do they lead their family? And are they a man of God, first, and a godly husband? And are they leading their family well? And do they have hunger? Are they self-driven? And then smart would be the not like smart intelligence, but like smart with people. Um, are they able to walk in a room and not manipulate, but just know this discerning factor of the room, who's in there in a conversation? Are they able to stop enough to listen, not just talk and have ideas? I know they're excited, but are they smart enough to know who they're around and what that person needs from them before they, or what you can give to them and what they need from you, and just work that through interpersonal relationships. If they're not good at that, then that's a hard, and so you can't teach character. It's hard, as you know. I mean, you can, but people people can change by the power of the Holy Spirit, but sometimes it takes a miracle for some people, and sometimes it's like just let them go and see what happens with them, and then others it's like, okay, this person we're gonna walk with because they're humble, they're hungry, and they're smart, and we'll see what God does in their life.
Man, this is gold, dude. Thank you so much for spending some time walking us through all of this. This has been one of the most fun interviews, walking through a lot of the nuts and bolts. There are so many like key takeaways, things that folks can apply right now to their leadership. But then you've given us a lot of these deeper nuggets, like, hey man, like how are you shaped? How are you allowing other leaders to shape you? And are you staying humble? Are you seeking God in all these things? Hey, man, I really appreciate your time. I want to honor your time. Is there any way folks who are interested in Vertical Church and Pastor Jason that they can follow you or just stay in touch with what's going on?
Sure, Jason Taylor Yuma on Instagram, or the church is the Vertical Church Yuma. So I think on Instagram it's the Vertical Church, and then YouTube is the Vertical Church Yuma. You can watch our sermons and see, you can watch the whatever you want, and then vertical.church is our website. But if anybody ever needs anything, direct message me or whatever, or reach out to Nolan, and I'd be willing to talk and help in whatever way I can.
Man, folks should take advantage of that. Great leader, great church. Thanks again, Pastor Jason.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see you again.
Hmm.